city constitution. The things that you want to focus on being in there are things that are kind of more broad brush, big picture, things that stay evergreen. I wouldn't want to put anything in there that's going to sound outdated in 2 years. It's the kind of thing that should only involve a little bit of tweaking every now and again. And of course, if the legislature comes back with something crazy, may involve some bigger tweaking. But it's essentially your governing document, the hierarchy of city laws. It's the charter and then the code of ordinances. And there's a value in putting things in the charter because it is less. It's less easy to amend it, and that courts have held that if the city needs to go and hold an election to change the charter, then that provides essentially a little bit of insulation for the city in terms of what's in it. For that same reason, though, you have to be careful with that because you may have a charter provision that you never enforce, and maybe the wording is a little bit tricky, and it may sound like something maybe it wasn't even intended to be. But if you find yourself in for instance, what's called a 1983 lawsuit, that's a lawsuit that basically said you did something that was counter to someone's constitutional right. So they may look at a provision of your charter and say that right there, that's a statement of city policy, and you'll kind of be. You'll end up being hung by that provision that's there, even though it may never be enforced or even interpreted. So those are kind of the things to watch out for. It's big picture stuff. The Charter Review Commission's role, and this is a little bit different than the adoption of the initial charter. State law kind of has some pretty stringent requirements on the appointment process, the adoption of the initial charter. Those don't apply to amendments, but the election requirement does. And most cities, and the city of Cleveland is included in this, have adopted the Charter Review Commission as the process for amending the city's charter. The city can amend a charter either by a petition of citizens. Council can propose an amendment to be submitted to the voters on its own motion, and then the city charter commission can make recommendations on changes to the charter. So the big picture, I think, for this, and let me also point out that it's under the current charter, which has the provisions for the Charter Review Commission, 5 members. It's a largely informal process, and I think for the first meeting, the thought was let's talk a little bit about how we want to tackle it, whether that be biting it off in chunks, having an all-day marathon, and it's absolutely y'all's right. I generally think that chunks are better than an all-day marathon because things will get, you may not have time to vet a certain issue. And I think it's kind of fair to point out, some of the revisions are going to be relatively obvious. Some revisions may be a little bit, they may involve some more thought in how it's going to be implemented. I know there's been some talk about adopting a new council position and adding the vote of the mayor, which is the far more traditional home rule style of government. You want to make sure that those types of amendments, because for a charter amendment, the charter is initially voted on altogether. For charter amendments, it's going to be individual propositions when it's changed. So there's always the possibility that one is accepted and one is not. And you got to kind of, game is the wrong word, but you got to think about how that is being put forth in individual propositions and contingency plan for it. This is approved, this is not approved. Now, if, for instance, if something like, let's say you're going to add a council position, well, if the mayor is given a vote and you add a council position, so you have 7 votes, what happens if the council position is not approved? Then you'll have 6 votes. Now, that actually may not have that much of an effect in practice. I know cities that do have 6 games on Sunday. But at the same time, you know, that's kind of the things you think about. The good news is, because if you're doing it on election day, that election to elect a new position would need to occur on the next uniform election day. If you're doing it to add a council position, for example, that can occur concurrent with the amendment. So you can have all of that in one shot, which is helpful for the logistics, because the gap between May and November can be a long gap, and then you have to figure out how filling that seat would occur without waiting until November. And there are other ways to do it, but these are the things you think about when you're looking at the charter, or at least the things I think. Anyway, with that being said, I know I don't want to eat up too much time.
No, but say for example, if there are some things that we want to add, so you're saying that we can put it on the November ballot?
I think so. And this at the end of the slides, that I've included some notes about the charter amendment election. Essentially, the deadline to order an election for the November date is going to be mid-August, and it's not impossible. And certainly, if council wants to have a charter election, it's technically possible that it could be done. But considering if it's approved, you got to wait 2 more years before you can do it again. You know, my recommendation would be to target the May election as the date for approval, just so you can vet it, kind of have it fully fleshed out. Now, if it's not approved, that the 2-year prohibition would apply, so you could actually put it on your ballot. And it doesn't appear to me that Cleveland has. Some cities will adopt there's a provision, I think, in the statute for Charter Review Commission that says they serve for a period of 6 months, maybe. I don't know that that's in Cleveland's charter. That is actually helpful, because usually what we end up running into is that there may have to be a reappointment for the last 2 weeks before something is approved or something. Anyway, so there's essentially timelines that will play into it, certain things, and then of course after the election, how it's implemented. If we're talking increasing term, the length of terms, something like that would. So moving from 2-year to 3-year terms, you're going to be subject to state law provisions, essentially the same as for county and district officials. I don't know that that's going to have as big of a practical effect on Cleveland, because the city's charter already has, for instance, the resign and run provision that's in the charter mirrors the one that's in the state constitution, and that is usually kind of the big change that happens when you're adopting extended terms, not terms, extended terms beyond 2 years. The other change would be, and talking to Scott, it sounds like the current elections are a majority vote. Some cities will have what's called a plurality vote. That means top X vote getters get those positions. So a plurality vote, if you go to an extended term, you couldn't also do a plurality vote in the state constitution requires a majority vote for any term of office within 2 years. But I mean, these are, as we go through the different positions, we can kind of get into the weeds on that stuff.
There are things that are in our current charter that no longer are permitted by the state law that we probably need to clean up. There's section when you get to like the budget. There's a schedule for the budget, which based on the new legislation, you can't do that schedule anymore based on the new mandates and schedule for the state law.
Yeah, that'll be a percentage of housekeeping.
So there's some things that need to be cleaned up, but then there's also things that need to be considered.
Right.
Just to one thing that's been discussed before in the past is how do you put an agenda item on? How does the council put an agenda item on the agenda? How many people does it call? I mean, I think ours does specify that any 2 can call. Actually, I don't even get our calls that in there. So you can identify, a lot of charters will say, how many council members does it take to call a special meeting? what does it take to require to get an agenda item on the agenda? You know, and put that formality into the charter so that it's practiced. You know, so there's things that we don't have that can be, if we want to make it in there to make it more effective. There's also cleanup that we need to look at, you know, the plurality on the election. If you remain 2-year terms, that's something to be considered. Because then if you have 3 positions like we did last year running, you have 3 people in those positions, then the top 3 out of those 9 get those 3 positions. Whereas the way we have it now is you have to have majorities, so you have to have 50 plus, you know, 1. And when you didn't get that, because you had 3 people running all 3 of those positions, we ended up having a runoff. Runoffs cost a lot of money. When you have the 3 that get the most votes, then all of a sudden, now the mayor obviously would be a separate vote, because it would be 1 position, but the council would be determined. You know, but those are all things just to be considered when you're looking at this. What are some things that we might want to look at? You know, you already talked about going from 2 to 3. When our charter was done, we really we went from general law to, you know, the charter. We kept a lot of the formalities of the general law, and didn't really change a lot. Where a lot of cities, when they make that change, they make significant changes. They go to the 3-year terms. They go to the mayor, you know, the vote. They add an extra council person. And so those are all things to be considered. And there was a reason that the charter committee at that point, when they started, set it up. Same thing could be true today. We may say, well, that's the reason why it was done. We want to continue to do it that way. But maybe things have changed and we want to maybe modify it for whatever reason.
It's a great point. This isn't just a cleanup of existing provisions. It is a fully flushed, what do you want to be able to charge?
What can be in here, and do we want to consider that? The charter calls out for department heads, and those department heads have changed, and the titles have changed, and so that's a cleanup. But
So
and then,
if you're
then this
targeting,
committee will, after we go through it, then this committee will have to make a recommendation. You will submit that recommendation as a formal submission to the council. The council then they will accept that recommendation from this committee. Then the council will make the decision if any or all of those recommendations should be taken to the voters to vote on. And then call the election or make it part of your potentially May election at that point. So we do need to do 2 things today. We need to appoint a chairman, and we need to determine a date and time for when we're going to meet again. Kind of a best schedule.
that's my fault. I completely just went off script. Lost right into it.
You were just trying to move us along. I mean, that's fine.
So this is also a good time for, if there is questions on the charter or whatever, or the process or things, now's a good time to kind of talk about those.
Well, who would like to be chair?
Mayor, how do you feel about being here?
Well, I will, but if I'm not, it's hurt my feelings. I will. I'll go ahead.
I make a motion, Mr. Danny Lee to be chairman. You already warmed up as the chair.
Yeah, I'm happy. Okay, it votes on.
Meeting time.
Yeah.
So, everybody, do you feel good about the block section? Doing it in sections?
Yeah.
I mean, looking at it, if we broke it up I did Article 1 through 3 in one meeting, Article 4 through 7 the next, and then Articles 8 and 9 last. That gives us right about 15 subsections each meeting. Breaks it up pretty evenly. Unless y'all want to extend that out, that's just a thought.
No, that's fine, that's fine.
15, 12, 15, so it's not bad.
Okay, now we need to start that process off pretty quick. What type of timeline?
I mean, do y'all wanna do it once a month? You do it twice a month? You know,
So if you break it off into three, essentially you'll have it covered in 3 meetings. August, September, October, if you did it concurrent with council meetings. That gives you November as additions, other things that you may want to look at. With the target being approving something to send to council in December. And I think that would give the commission and council plenty of time to take care of it.
Would you guys be open to having it before the regular council meeting?
My only worry with that is we are doing about 15, doing it in this schedule, we got about 15
Yeah.
substeps, and we don't want to run into council. I don't think we should have we might, let's allow ourselves that time not to have a limitless hard stop.
Okay, what
But
about
the Monday before each council meeting.
I'm good, I mean,
Yeah.
Mr. Clark is good with Monday before council. Okay.
so it'll be the third Monday, or
The third Monday of every month.
most likely.
Can we start it at 6?
Just, we could, I mean, do it at 6, and do it it's Monday before the council meeting,
Yes.
which most likely would be the third Monday unless,
Unless
The first is on a
first
Tuesday.
Yeah.
which in August is, August is on Thursday, so it would work that way.
But we'll get the meeting invites out, so we'll have them all, but I'm okay with that. Mr. Lee, Desiree?
I'm fine. Well,
At 6
anybody
o'clock?
have any other discussion on anything? You done, Mark?
I'm good.
Scott, got anything else? Okay, we'll call it a meeting, and I'll see you guys on the third Monday, next month, at 6 p.m. Which Alice will send everybody a text. Okay, we got about 15 minutes before the